Susan Chekow-Lusignan, Director of Marketing and Program Development for the Friends and Foundation of the Rochester Public Library. Thank you. FFRPL raises funds, presents programs, supports special projects, helps to create specialized spaces, and purchases supplemental materials and equipment for the Rochester Public Library. We welcome you to Book Sandwiched In. We ask that you please silence your cell phones at this time. Our thanks go to those who help fund programs like these through FFRPL, the dedicated FFRPL committee members who curate and organize these events, our guest speakers and artists who so graciously share their time and talents with us, the library staff who help with our setup and production, and the thousands of people who attend each year here on site and remotely. And if you don't receive our weekly e-newsletters and want to get those, you can give me your email at the close of the program. Today's review is of the book Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. Demon Copperhead was selected as one of the 10 best books of 2022 by the New York Times. It was an Oprah's Book Club selection, an instant New York Times bestseller, instant Wall Street Journal bestseller, a #1 Washington Post bestseller, and, as of just yesterday, Demon Copperhead won the 2023 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction. Exactly. Our committee does a very good job in selecting these books. The novel has been described as a masterful recasting of David Copperfield, narrated by an Appalachian boy whose wise, unwavering voice relates his encounters with poverty, addiction, institutional failures, and moral collapse, and his efforts to conquer them. Our reviewer today is Miriam Elizabeth Burstein, PhD, Professor of English at SUNY Brockport. Professor Burstein has taught 19th century British literature at SUNY Brockport since 1999. Please welcome her to our podium.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming out. So I'm going to guess that many of you are familiar with Barbara Kingsolver from the Poisonwood Bible, at the very least. Yes? Yeah. Which is a novel that I read right after it was published. I was doing my doctoral dissertation at the time, and I needed a break. And I thought, yes, light reading. That conjunction is totally appropriate for her recent novel, Demon Copperhead, which, as you know, is inspired by David Copperfield. So we have long book and very long book. How many of you have read David Copperfield? I'm impressed, actually. So David Copperfield, as many of you probably do know, is an autobiographical novel in which, among other things, Dickens is drawing on very painful childhood experiences, particularly being sent out to work by his financially challenged father, John Dickens, who in the novel is caricatured as the always jolly but also always debt-ridden Mr. Micawber. Now, while Kingsolver is not writing directly about her own life in Demon Copperhead, she is Appalachian from Kentucky, and she remarks in an interview with Slate that, "I know Demon. He is not very different from me. I was very bullied as a kid for not wearing the right clothes, for being non-conforming in various ways, and being perceived as less wealthy. I've lived with imposter syndrome my entire life since I left Kentucky." Elsewhere, in a conversation at the Center on Fiction, she has remarked that she was worried about giving Demon any kind of authentic vernacular voice, precisely because of the stereotypical associations. It's an anxiety that she, in fact, then works into the novel itself. So, what I'm going to do today is to put these two very big books into conversation with each other, to ask what working with David Copperfield, a novel set in mid-Victorian England, does for Kingsolver, who is writing about late 20th century Appalachia. Now, it's worth noting that if you have read David Copperfield, and most of you in this room apparently have, then Demon Copperhead's plot and characters are going to seem very, very familiar. And she has been very open about this in interviews. She really is writing a one-to-one correspondence between the texts. Both novels trace the growth of an orphaned boy with a mother too young to fully grasp her adult responsibilities, an abusive stepfather who turns him into a child laborer, and an older friend whose charisma and attractiveness makes him dangerous to others. Again, both novels represent a young man discovering his skills as a storyteller. And both novels find their protagonist entering into first a very misguided relationship with a woman suspiciously like his mother, before winding up with someone who is morally and intellectually his equal and possibly his superior. At the level of Demon Copperhead's protagonist's plot, there are really no spoilers. The surprises mostly come from unexpected changes to the supporting characters. Indeed, you can play games of Spot the Character, as names in Demon Copperhead repeatedly remind us of its debt to David Copperfield. The grasping Mr. Murdstone is Merle Stone. The slimy Uriah Heep is nicknamed U-Haul. And the perennially broke Macabres are the Macabres, and so on and so forth. But we are not in Dickens's Victorian England, but in a region dearly important to Kingsolver, Appalachia, here specifically in Lee County, West Virginia, and Tennessee. In her other Appalachian novels, like Prodigal Summer and Flight Behavior, Kingsolver explores the lives of farming families whose experiences are deeply rooted in the local environment. Her characters must reconcile their need to survive with the vagaries of capitalist demand, such as the implosion of tobacco farming, the unpredictability of weather, which can do in both the crops and the house, and the ever-present threat of pests, insects, animals, humans. The protagonists of the interwoven plots of Prodigal Summer, whether youthful newcomers to the community or octogenarians, learn how to adapt to nature in the course of adapting it to their own needs, especially by coming to respect the role of insects and animal predators. Better to rely on the mosquitoes and coyotes than to douse everything with pesticide. In the process, even the most crotchety characters find their own place. Similarly, Della Robbia, the lead character of Flight Behavior, finds that her straitened life in a family of on-the-brink sheep farmers is touched by the unexpected arrival of beautiful monarch butterflies, whose presence in her family's woods results from global climate change. But as she is shocked to discover from a scientist studying the butterflies, this forest of flame that had lifted her despair by its appearance may in fact herald the monarch's apocalyptic disappearance, as they cannot survive the winter there. The point being that Kingsolver constantly reminds us that life in what appear to be isolated, impoverished rural spaces turns out to be caught up in worldwide historical trends, whether resource extraction or climate change. Her concerns in Demon Copperhead are very much in line with these earlier novels. Now, I'm going to admit that I was a little startled when I read the first sentence of Kingsolver's acknowledgments at the end of Demon Copperhead. I'm grateful to Charles Dickens for writing David Copperfield, his impassioned critique of institutional poverty and its damaging effects on children in his society. She expands on this a bit in her Center for Fiction interview, in which she describes herself visiting Dickens' house, sitting at his desk, and entering into a kind of moment of communion with Dickens, feeling his anger and outrage, she says, at what has been done to children. So after I was invited to appear here, I reread David Copperfield for the first time in about 5 or 6 years. And while it certainly does address poverty and its effect on the psyche, perhaps most memorably not in David Copperfield's case, but in the case of Uriah Heep, whose vengefulness derives from his early drilling in being humble, poverty as she vividly represents it in Demon Copperfield, I will get them right at some point in this speech. Poverty, as she vividly represents it in Demon Copperhead, is only on the table in David Copperfield in fits and starts. David's poverty as a child is temporary, actually. The desperate streetwalker Martha Endell is a better example, but she makes only a tiny handful of appearances. Little Emily would have led a perfectly contented life if Steerforth had not appeared. If one is thinking about Dickens and poverty, the novels that usually come to mind are Oliver Twist, or Bleak House, or Hard Times. So I sat there and I thought about this for a while, as I would say to my students. Transplanting David Copperfield's mid-Victorian England to mostly 1990s Appalachia in the midst of the opioid crisis requires a good deal of artistic labor. As many book reviewers have already pointed out, the big scandal in David Copperfield, the wealthy James Steerforth's seduction of little Emily, taking advantage of her desire to be a lady, is no longer intelligible as a big scandal when you drop it into late 20th century America. And little Emily's longing to become a lady similarly doesn't really make sense to a lot of modern readers. What on earth does she mean by that? But the way in which Kingsolver condenses the novel into a narrative of institutional poverty does, I think, tell us something more generally about how she goes about turning David Copperfield into Demon Copperhead. She condenses Dickens's novel chronologically, socially, and really spiritually. So first, the chronology. David Copperfield stretches from just before David's birth, in fact, to his full adulthood as a happily married, best-selling novelist, multiple children playing at his side. It ends with him contemplating the road of life he shares with his second wife, Agnes, and just as importantly, the large community to which he belongs, both pleasantly and otherwise. Demon Copperhead, by contrast, ends with our protagonist in his early 20s, shortly out of drug rehabilitation, and likely on the brink of a successful career as a graphic novelist. Literally on the road, driving down, with his Agnes, or as she's nicknamed, Angus. Then they're going to the ocean he's been trying and failing to see his entire life, quite literally. The trip itself, just the getting there, possibly the best part of my life so far, he muses. And as I said, this is not a spoiler because Demon's plot trajectory does not deviate from David's. He ends up pretty much, in terms of love life, where David does. Charles Dickens rather notoriously wraps up multiple storylines in David Copperfield, courtesy of the British Empire. He ships several characters out to Australia, where they rehabilitate themselves through the power of hard work, implicitly liberated from England's class and gender prejudices. By the novel's end, virtually all characters are where they ought to be, whether that be dead, in prison, running a prison, or happily married. While some evildoers are still causing harm, most characters have labored to receive their just reward. But putting to one side those who failed to survive, Demon Copperhead leaves many of its characters continuing on as they were, denying them dramatic personal transformations or big redemption scenes. Usually, these characters are unaware that there is anything else for them to be or to do. June Peggott, a character specific to Demon Copperhead, is unique in that she went to college and worked as a nurse in Knoxville. Despite her frustration at urban prejudices, she is mocked for her accent, for example. Her time away enables her to better grasp the possibilities available and denied for those who remain. In refusing Dickens's sops to poetic justice, Kingsolver leaves the reader poised just on the brink of disappointment or hope. What can be made of a world in which radical change isn't even perceived as an option? Such pointedly unresolved questions lead us to the second way in which Kingsolver condenses David Copperfield: social class. David Copperfield himself is born into a middle-class household with a servant, Clara Peggotty. When after his mother's death, his stepfather sends him off to work applying labels in a warehouse, he feels it to be degradation because he has always been treated and educated as a future gentleman. The deep remembrance of the sense I had of being utterly without hope now of the shame I felt in my position, of the misery it was to my young heart to believe that day by day what I had learned and thought and delighted in and raised my fancy and my emulation up by would pass away from me little by little, never to be brought back anymore, cannot be written. The Peggottys are servants and watermen, not David's equals. Steerforth derives much of his sway from his family's wealth. The Micawbers are scrabbling to hang on to the remains of their gentility. Uriah Heep tries and fails to claw his way up from poverty to gentility, and so on. The characters are indelibly marked by the signs of their class origins. Little Emily has no chance of becoming a lady, despite her beauty and her intelligence. In Demon Copperhead, virtually everyone, even the agents from the DSS, comes from the same impoverished social stratum. It's only when Demon is taken in by the local football coach, Winfield, that he really runs into anyone who could be described as middle class. Fast Forward, the counterpart to Dickens' Steerforth, derives all his charm from his status as a high school football star. But when Demon meets him, they're both in foster care. As the nickname Fast Forward suggests, whereas Demon learns to enjoy the trip, as it were, he is all about reaching a distant goal, perhaps missing significant parts of his plot in the meantime. His drive to maintain the last fading remnants of his high school stardom is high-grade escapism, a means of avoiding a truth Demon first fully learns from his English teacher, Mr. Armstrong. Everything that could be taken is gone. Mountains left with their heads blown off, rivers running black. My people are dead of trying, or headed that way, addicted as we are to keeping ourselves alive. There's no more blood here to give, just war wounds, madness, a world of pain looking to be killed. Significantly, while Demon absolutely has aspirations as a comics artist, he doesn't want to escape his class identity, let alone Lee County. Instead, his years in rehab in Knoxville serve the same function as June Peggott's, contextualizing his experiences of poverty. I'm going to tell you something, he says. There's country poor and there's city poor. As much as my life as I'd spent in front of a TV thinking, oh man, city's where the money comes from, where the money trees grow, I was seeing more to the picture now. I mean, yes, that is where they all grow, but plenty of people are sitting in that shade with nothing falling on them. Demon's attitude is very much in line with Kingsolver's other Appalachian fiction. He loves the countryside, and he loves his community. This speaks to the third way in which Kingsolver condenses David Copperfield. This is not a Christian novel. Now, David Copperfield is not a religious novel as anyone then or now would understand it, but it does assume very far in the background the existence of a liberal Protestant interpretive framework. Dickens is completely disinterested when it comes to doctrine, or uninterested rather. If you gave him a pop quiz on the 39 Articles of the Church of England, he would just laugh at you. But his novels consistently value practical Christianity, acts of self-sacrificial charity and love, benefiting those who are poor, disabled, orphaned, and victimized by legal and social systems. Those who are not rewarded or punished in this world will be rewarded or punished hereafter. In Bleak House, Mrs. Blinder, the landlady, refuses to take any rent from 3 orphaned children, for who could take it from them? Well, well, says Mr. Jarndyce in response. It is enough that the time will come when this good woman will find that it was much, and that forasmuch as she did it unto the least of these. Kingsolver, by contrast, is pretty consistently skeptical across her body of work of all organized belief. But her characters are not necessarily atheists. In her other novels, they experience God as manifested in the glories of creation and adjust their engagement with the natural world accordingly. Nanny, the free-thinking organic farmer in Prodigal Summer, finds in the book of Genesis not a license to transform the world for humanity's convenience, but to understand that while for us the fruit shall be food, we have to keep in mind that to the tree, it's a child. so all of nature becomes sacred. In Demon Copperhead, organized religion, again, does not get what you'd call good press, although a preacher who gives Demon a ride when he runs away to his grandmother does offer him an important lesson. The moral of his story was how you never know the size of hurt that's in people's hearts or what they're liable to do about it, given the chance. This reminder about the mystery of other people's suffering is core to the novel's larger brief about society's unwillingness to think about people like Demon as anything other than stereotypes. But just as important is the preacher's kindness and lack of judgment in the moment of Demon's need. Similarly, when Demon introduces Christmas celebrations to Coach Winfield and his daughter, neither of whom have ever bothered with Christmas before, it's not as a religious experience, but rather as an act of family bonding over the sheer fun of it all. I told her, surprised is the point. Waiting is the point. Watching wrapped up secrets pile up under the tree that you shake and poke till you feel like the cat that's going to die of being curious. This is a nod to Charles Dickens's role in shaping the modern experience of Christmas, but it's also about endorsing joy, pleasure, and togetherness in the now, something to be carved out from a life of everyday poverty. The Winfields, who are solidly middle class and who have a full-time maid, don't see why such moments of anticipation and excitement over even cheap toys might be necessary. But for Demon, the future that matters is the future that occurs on a definite date, not in an indeterminate afterlife. And this is perhaps where Demon Copperhead comes together, not only with David Copperfield, but with most of Dickens's work. The urgency of making a better life now. Demon Copperhead is an unashamedly didactic novel, and that's something that Dickens would totally be able to get behind. And while it certainly praises the joys of reading superhero comics, it ultimately endorses the artist's power to transform how audiences perceive themselves, their circumstances, and those around them. Kingsolver's other novels dwell on the fury of those who only see themselves treated with contempt in the media. Della Robbia in Flight Behavior, for example, resents how TV shows hold Tennessee farmers up for mockery. Or, as Demon says to everyone out there who cracks wise about hillbillies, we can actually hear you. In David Copperfield, it is never quite clear what David's novels are about, although he tells us that his third novel has a purpose growing, not remotely, out of his experience. But Demon's breakthrough comes from writing a comic called Redneck, in which he responds to his friend Tommy's depression over popular representations of places like Southwest Virginia by inventing a superhero, one of their own, who saves local people like Superman does city dwellers. As he says later, our people, our mountains, all our worries, a universe of ghosts. Unlike David's novels, which are written in company with other people around him, but authored in effect in solitude from his own mind, Demon's art becomes truly collaborative, involving both Tommy's outline work and his much wider range of historical and political reading. It's Tommy who inspires him to see the possibility of drawing a comic about how what has happened to the Appalachians has happened all over the USA. The Cherokees that got kicked off their land. All the other tribes, same. Black people after they were freed up, wanting their own farms but getting no end of grief for it, till they gave up and went to the city. This, in effect, is Kingsolver's novel, which seeks to narrate both Appalachian experiences and to put them square in the midst of national history. And so this then is the other thing that Kingsolver finds in Dickens. Despite her novel's brutal representations of grinding poverty and drug addiction and child exploitation, it manages to be optimistic. Although Demon at one point compares his life to his current job sorting trash into dumpsters, which always leaves you back where you started. The novel does insist that if there's hope for individuals, there is hope for places like Lee County as a whole. Demon Copperhead is not a novel that tells the reader that things are so bad that nothing can be done.